On the evening of the 3rd of September 1878, somewhere between 600 and 700 people entered the River Thames. Most never returned. They were not sailors or soldiers. They were day trippers, still wearing their Sunday clothes, heading home from a pleasure cruise along the Kent coast on a fine late summer evening. The band had been playing on the deck. Some of the children were already asleep. And then, across 4 minutes, one of the deadliest maritime disasters in British history closed over itself and was done. The ship was gone. The people were gone. And within a generation, the story was almost gone too. This is the wreck of the Princess Alice, the greatest single loss of life ever recorded on an inland British waterway, and the catastrophe that London spent a century quietly burying. But that is the end. The beginning is smaller and quieter. She slid off the stocks at Greenock in 1865, built by Caird and Company, Scottish shipbuilders whose yards had already established a reputation along the Clyde for the Wemyss Bay Railway Company, who worked her between Wemyss Bay and Rothsay under the name Bute. She ran as a paddle steamer, 2 funnels, 251 tons, 67 metres from bow to stern. Not especially grand, not especially swift, but steady and elegant in the manner of her age. Within 2 years she had changed hands, taken the name Princess Alice in honour of Queen Victoria's second daughter, Princess Alice of the United Kingdom, the third of Victoria's 9 children, and settled into service on the Thames. The name carried a kind of quiet confidence, the sort of name you gave a vessel you expected to keep for a long time. By 1878, she belonged to the London Steamboat Company, the dominant force in Thames excursion traffic, operating a fleet of 70 steamers across routes stretching from central London down to Gravesend, Sheerness, and the Essex coast. At the height of the mid-century river trade, some 200 steamers worked these waters, and the London Steamboat Company sat at the centre of all of it, still trading, still running, still carrying tens of thousands of Londoners each season toward coastlines and gardens they could not otherwise reach. For 2 shillings a ticket, and nothing at all for children, you could leave the city's smoke behind and spend the afternoon at Rocheville Gardens in Gravesend, where there was a bear pit, a theatre, and the particular pleasure of being somewhere else entirely. On the 3rd of September, the Princess Alice departed Swan Pier near London Bridge in the morning, ran downstream to Sheerness and Gravesend, and turned for home. Captain William Grinstead, a man described by those who had sailed with him as sober, steady, and careful, held the wheel. His passengers, somewhere between 600 and 700 of them, had taken their fill of the day. The weather had held fine. The band played on the main deck. Near one of the paddle boxes, a couple argued about something no one would afterwards remember. Entirely ordinary, entirely unremarkable. The ordinary texture of an ordinary evening on the water. What none of them knew was what the river had already swallowed that day. 1 hour before the collision, the outfalls at Barking and Crossness had discharged their twice-daily load into the Thames. 75 million gallons of untreated sewage pumped directly into the channel by the same infrastructure that Joseph Basil Jett had designed in the aftermath of the Great Stink of 1858, when the Thames had become so foul that Parliament itself was forced to adjourn. Basil Jett's system was an engineering triumph that had saved the city from cholera. But its logic was displacement. Move the waste downstream, away from the population. The Crossness pumping station, that ornate cathedral of iron and beam engines on the Erith marshes, was functioning exactly as intended. The water in Gallions Reach that evening carried more than the tide. It was among the most contaminated stretches of open waterway anywhere in Britain. This fact would matter in the worst way imaginable, and very soon. As the Princess Alice rounded Tripcock Point and moved into Gallions Reach, Captain Grinstead shifted toward the south bank, standard practice for a vessel working against the incoming tide. That course brought him across the path of the Bywell Castle, a large Newcastle collier running downriver at speed. The collier's engines reversed. It was not enough. The Bywell Castle struck the Princess Alice amidships and split her in two. The bow lifted. The stern dropped immediately. Within 4 minutes, the whole ship had vanished beneath the surface. 4 minutes. Not one lifeboat launched. Passengers in heavy Victorian dress were dragged under by their own clothing. Most could not swim. Those who broke the surface found themselves immersed in water thick with raw sewage, and a number who were pulled clear that night, alive and breathing, succumbed to illness in the days that followed. The wreck claimed between 600 and 700 lives. The precise figure was never established because no proper passenger list had been kept and no headcount ever taken. The river accepted them and offered no exact accounting in return. The coroner's jury delivered its verdict in November. The Princess Alice had been overcrowded, deficient in life-saving equipment, and inefficiently managed. The Board of Trade inquiry arrived at entirely different conclusions, placing the fault on the Princess Alice for failing to observe the portside passing regulation and largely clearing the Bywell Castle. 2 official investigations, 2 contradictory verdicts, resolving nothing between them. What both shared was a quiet implication that the condition of passenger steamers on the Thames had not been treated as a matter requiring urgent remedy. Captain Grinstead had offered no account. He lay among the dead. Within weeks, a relief fund at the Mansion House had gathered £22,000 for survivors and bereaved families. Some 23,000 people each donated sixpence toward a memorial, which funded a marble cross in Woolwich Cemetery, raised above the mass grave where the unidentified dead had been buried on the 9th of September. It stands there still. The disaster produced change. The Metropolitan Board of Works began treating sewage rather than discharging it raw into the river. Sludge boats were commissioned to carry the waste out to the North Sea, a practice that continued until 1998, and the problem of what to do with London's overflow sewage remained unresolved long enough to require the Thames Tideway Tunnel, completed in 2024, to finally intercept the combined sewer overflows that Bazalgette's Victorian system could never fully contain. The Marine Police received steam launches after the rowing boats deployed during the rescue proved wholly insufficient, and the Thames River Police, already the oldest professional police force in the world, had done what they could from open-sided skiffs in a darkened reach, and it had not been nearly enough. New regulations required all British vessels to carry emergency signal lights. The completion of the Royal Albert Dock in 1880 helped separate the movements of large cargo ships from the smaller passenger vessels that had shared the same reaches of the river. The London Steamboat Company did not endure. It struggled through the years that followed, reached the market in 1884 and passed through 2 further owners before it was finished. 5 years after the collision, the Bywell Castle went down in the Bay of Biscay, taking all 40 of her crew with her. What remains at Tripcock Point is almost nothing. A plaque, an information board, the marble cross in Woolwich Cemetery, still standing over the mass grave, still carrying the names of those who could be identified before the earth closed over them. The Princess Alice is sometimes described as Britain's forgotten disaster, and the forgetting is itself a kind of record. A catastrophe that claimed more lives than many celebrated industrial accidents, that reshaped maritime law, river policing, and the sewage infrastructure of the largest city in the world, and yet slipped so completely from public memory that most Londoners today could not place the name. The Marchioness disaster of 1989, when a dredger struck a pleasure cruiser on this same river and took 51 lives, entered public consciousness and stayed there. The Princess Alice, which killed more than 10 times as many, did not. The river absorbed it. The city moved forward. The pleasure steamers kept running for another decade, Still working, still trusted, still carrying their passengers downstream on summer afternoons until the screw steamers displaced them and the whole era ended without ceremony. What was lost in Gallions Reach on that September evening was not only 650 lives, it was the assumption that the river was safe, that the industry working it exercised care, and that someone in authority was paying attention. None of those things were true. And the Thames, wide and dark and entirely indifferent, carried that truth downstream and out to sea.